All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling something pretty profound. Book 1 of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Ah, yeah, this one's a classic. And I know it can seem a little daunting, a Roman emperor reflecting on life and philosophy.
Definitely. But the beauty of it is there's so much practical wisdom tucked away in those reflections. So our mission today is to break it down, specifically Book 1, and extract the core lessons, the stuff that can really help you navigate your own life.
And what's cool about book one is that it's not just abstract ideas. It's actually Aurelius looking back at the people who shaped him, the influences that made him the leader and thinker he was.
Almost like a behind-the-scenes look at how a wise person is built.
Exactly. And that's where the real gold is. By understanding his influences, we can start to understand the values and principles he lived by and how we might apply those same things to our own lives.
Sounds like a plan. So where do we even begin with a guy like Marcus Aurelius?
Well, he starts off by talking about his grandfather, Vero, and from him, Aurelius learned the importance of good character and a kind of inner peace.
Like the foundation of being a good person and not letting things get to you?
Exactly, just that core decency and resilience. He describes his grandfather as someone who was just naturally steady and unflappable, which, in a world as chaotic as ours, that's a pretty valuable trait.
I can see that. And then, of course, there's his father who, even though he passed away when Aurelius was young, still seems to have had a huge impact.
Yeah, even though he wasn't physically present, his legacy really stuck with Aurelius. And the two main things that he highlights about his father were discretion and what he calls virility.
Discretion and virility. I can see how those might be important for an emperor. But what do they really mean in this context?
Good question. Because it's not about, being secretive or physically strong in the typical sense. Discretion, for Aurelius, meant good judgment, thoughtful action. And virility was more about inner strength, integrity, that kind of thing.
So someone who was both thoughtful and morally grounded.
Exactly. And even in his absence, his father's example taught Aurelius about the importance of making well-considered decisions and staying true to your principles.
It's interesting how those early influences, even when they're not direct teaching, can really shape you.
Totally. And then we get to his mother, who was, well, let's just say she was a pretty powerful force in his life.
Yeah, judging by the list of virtues he attributes to her, she was a major influence. What were
Yeah.
some of the key takeaways there?
It's actually really impressive, the scope of her influence. He talks about her deep respect for, I guess you could say, something bigger than herself, a sense of reverence for the world. And then on top of that, she was incredibly generous, not just with material things, but even with her thoughts, like actively avoiding negativity.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah. And then there's the whole emphasis on frugality, like really rejecting that opulent, wealthy lifestyle. Almost like she instilled in him this understanding that true value isn't about material possessions.
It's like she laid the groundwork for his entire philosophical outlook.
Yeah, she really provided that initial grounding in virtue. And then building on that foundation, we get to the more specific, actionable traits that Aurelius consciously learned from his father. This is where it gets super practical.
All right, let's get into it. What were some of those concrete lessons from his father?
Well, he mentions this idea of mansuetude and serene firmness in well-examined decisions. It's kind of a mouthful, but basically it means being gentle but resolute, especially after you've really thought things through. No knee-jerk reactions, but once you decide, you stand your ground calmly.
That's actually a great lesson for anyone in any leadership position.
Absolutely. And it applies to so many situations in life, taking the time to really think things through, but then acting with conviction. And then he talks about his father's dislike of boasting about his achievements, a real sign of humility. And then something that's super relatable, a love of work and perseverance.
Yeah, can't get much done without those.
Exactly. Putting in the effort, sticking with things, even when they get tough. These are timeless qualities for sure. And the list goes on. Aurelius talks about how his father was always willing to listen to people who could contribute to the community. Showing the value of collaboration and diverse perspectives, he was impartial in recognizing merit, focusing on actual contribution rather than, favoritism or anything like that.
Sounds like a pretty fair and just leader.
And he understood the importance of balance. He knew when to push hard and when to step back, avoiding burnout, essentially. It's like he had this innate understanding of pacing himself.
You don't hear much about work-life balance back in Roman times.
Right. But he was definitely ahead of his time in that regard. And it wasn't just about work, it was about his relationships too. He set healthy boundaries, was sociable and understanding with his friends who had other commitments, recognizing that everyone has different priorities.
A lot of us could learn from that. It's easy to get caught up in your own world and forget that other people have stuff going on.
Absolutely. And Aurelius goes on to describe his father as someone who was meticulous in his thinking, but also adaptable. He was persistent, but not stubborn, always open to new information and willing to change his mind if it was warranted.
That's a tough balance to strike. I think a lot of us struggle with that, being thorough but also flexible.
It's a lifelong practice for sure. And he valued long-term friendships, the kind that run deep over those superficial, dramatic displays of emotion. And get this, he was big on self-reliance and inner peace. He didn't need constant external validation or praise, and he paid attention to the details, but without getting stressed out about them.
Basically the opposite of a micromanager.
Exactly. And for someone in his position, it's remarkable that he didn't seek out applause or flattery. He was focused on substance over show, which I think is a really important lesson for anyone in a leadership role.
Absolutely. Knowing your own worth without needing constant reassurance from others.
Exactly. And that sense of inner strength really permeated everything he did. Aurelius talks about his constant awareness of the needs of the empire, his dedication to his duty as a leader. He managed public funds responsibly and was open to criticism, understanding that accountability comes with the territory. And he wasn't superstitious or manipulative. He didn't try to curry favor or play games. He was grounded, firm in his convictions, and without any need for those, cheap thrills or fads.
Like the opposite of someone who's easily swayed by trends.
Totally. Content with the essentials. And even though he had access to wealth and comfort, he used them without arrogance or dependence. He appreciated them, but he wasn't attached to them.
He understood that true happiness comes from within.
Yeah. And Aurelius points out that his father was perceived as mature, well-rounded, and competent, both in his personal and public life. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or put on a show. He was just himself. And he appreciated genuine philosophers, but he wasn't pretentious about it or easily fooled by, fancy rhetoric.
Someone who could see through the BS.
Yeah, exactly. And he was friendly and had a good sense of humor, but always in moderation. No need to be the life of the party or anything like that. And he took care of his body, but for health reasons, not vanity, which meant he rarely got sick.
I'm sensing a theme here. Balance, moderation, self-awareness.
Right. It's all connected. And he was grateful for other people's talents and abilities like eloquence or knowledge, but he wasn't envious. In fact, he actively helped others achieve recognition for their excellence. He respected tradition, but without making a big fuss about it, and he preferred stability over unnecessary travel and excitement.
A man of simple pleasures.
You could say that, and even after a severe headache, he'd jump right back to work. Talk about resilience.
No time for whining, I guess.
Right. He kept few secrets, mostly concerning state affairs, which speaks to his trustworthiness. And he was wise and moderate in celebrations and public projects, always prioritizing what was truly needed over what might be popular or flashy. He didn't overindulge in baths or fancy clothes or elaborate buildings. Even the appearance of his servants was modest.
Living simply, leading by example.
Exactly. Aurelius even mentions his father's simple attire when he was at his country estate. Just no need for pretense. And he describes an incident where his father calmly but firmly dealt with a demanding tax collector, showing his composure under pressure. Overall, his character was described as even-keeled, not cruel, sullen, or harsh. Everything was calculated, but without agitation.
It's like he embodied Stoic philosophy before it was even a thing.
Right. Aurelius even compares his father to Socrates, who could both do without and enjoy things that tend to control most people. And his father's physical strength and self-control were seen as reflections of a well-balanced and invincible soul, even in the face of his final illness.
Like Aurelius is giving us a blueprint for a virtuous life through his father's example.
Absolutely. He internalized these lessons by deeply reflecting on them. And then he goes on to briefly mention other important influences in his life, like his brother and teachers such as Apollonius, Rusticus, and Maximus. And the central idea that they all reinforce was this concept of living in accordance with nature.
So not just going against the grain, but aligning yourself with the natural order of things.
Exactly. It's about understanding the way things are and working within that framework. And beyond these key figures, he also reflects on certain experiences and circumstances he was grateful for. Things like his upbringing, the opportunities he had, the fact that he avoided certain vices, the qualities of his wife, the support he had in helping others. insights he gained from dreams, and his journey in philosophy, which was very practical and grounded rather than just theoretical.
So a combination of the right people and the right circumstances.
Yeah, it's all part of the equation. And the common thread running through all of this in Book One is gratitude. Aurelius expresses deep appreciation for all of these individuals and experiences that shaped him. It's a reminder that we don't develop in a vacuum.
It's like he's saying, hey, pay attention to the people and experiences that are shaping you because they matter.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Book One, what's the main message you hope people will take away?
I think the most important takeaway is the profound impact that the people around us have on our character. Aurelius meticulously outlines the virtues he observed and learned from those who came before him, and it highlights the importance of recognizing and appreciating the lessons we can learn from positive role models.
It's not just about, passively observing these people. It's about actively seeking out mentors and role models and consciously incorporating their strengths into our own lives.
It makes you think about the people who've had the biggest impact on your own life, right?
Totally. Who are those people and what qualities or lessons have you absorbed from them, maybe even subconsciously? And how can you consciously cultivate those qualities in your own life moving forward?
So taking stock of those influences and using them as a roadmap for personal growth.
Right. Turning that rear view mirror of influence into a windshield for future development.
Some really powerful stuff. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
My pleasure. Always fascinating to explore these timeless ideas.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the knowledge you've shared.